Washington, D.C., February 8th, 1960. Room 1334 of the Longworth House office building is a small but imposing space with high ceilings, brass chandeliers, and a huge mural called America at Peace. Around a semicircular dais sit 9 congressmen, members of the House Subcommittee on Legislative Oversight, all middle-aged men, many with graying hair and horn-rimmed glasses, shuffling papers and conversing in hushed tones. They're here for the first full day of the Congressional Payola hearings, an investigation into whether the radio industry has been corrupted by greedy DJs taking bribes from record companies in exchange for playing their singles. The committee chairman, Arkansas Congressman Orrin Harris, bangs his gavel, eager to get the hearings underway. It's an election year, and this can bring in positive press. They are actually doing something about the menace of rock and roll. General Counsel Robert Lishman, a white-haired 56-year-old Harvard-educated litigator, calls his first witness, a clean-cut DJ from Boston named Norm Prescott, also with horn-rimmed glasses and neatly trimmed brown hair. He looks about as far from a rock and roll DJ as Lishman himself, which is to say, he looks believable. Lishman paces slowly back and forth. Mr. Prescott, you left employment with station WBEZ in Boston in July 1959, is that correct? Yes, sir. And did you not leave WBEZ and conclude your career as a disc jockey, chiefly because you were disgusted with the payola conditions in the industry? Mr. Lishman, I was not only disgusted with the payola conditions, but frankly, I was ashamed of myself. I was ashamed of the industry, and I walked away from it for that reason. Lishman knows what Prescott is going to say before he says it, because he and Prescott have rehearsed it. Over the next 2 hours, Prescott admits to accepting cash, gifts, even payments on a new car, altogether nearly $10,000 worth of payola. He implicates not only himself, but his fellow DJs and the entire industry. He tells the committee that the top 40 charts in Billboard and Cashbox magazine are a sham. The numbers on the chart aren't based on actual sales or airplay. They come from falsified reports submitted to the magazines by DJs and station managers. By the time Lishman is done with Prescott, all of the congressmen are leaning in, fascinated. When he opens up the floor to questions, Representative John Bennett of Michigan looks at Prescott and clears his throat. Do you think without payola that a lot of this so-called junk music, rock and roll stuff that appeals to the teenagers would not be played? Never get on the air. Do you think payola is responsible for it? Yes. It keeps it on the air because it fills pockets. Lishman smiles. He's 56, and he does not understand rock and roll. It's trash. Worse, it's trash that his own children listen to and like. But he knows if he's going to convince Congress to pass new legislation making payola a federal crime, it will take more than hating the music, coaching a witness like Prescott. But Lishman has a plan for the third act of his play. 2 star witnesses, Alan Freed, America's most successful radio DJ, and Dick Clark, host of the wildly popular rock TV show American Bandstand. If Lishman plays his cards right, he'll show the committee members enough evidence to discredit them both and get them off the airwaves in one fell swoop. Without Freed and Clark, hopefully rock and roll will be an unpleasant memory. The country can go back to listening to good music again. American Scandal is sponsored by the new Audible original Bad Republican by Meghan McCain. In her debut audio memoir, Meghan McCain gives a first-hand look into the life of the conservative rebel and departing co-host of The View. You'll hear what it's like to grow up as the daughter of an American icon and to mourn his loss very publicly just 1 year into her tenure as co-host of America's most-watched daytime talk show. Her memoir also reveals how she handled attacks from the U.S. president and her thoughts on cancel culture, dating, and how our country treats new mothers. It's unsparingly honest, deeply relatable, and highly entertaining. Go beyond what you know about Meghan McCain from TV and your newsfeed. Visit audible.com/badrepublican and listen now.
We get support from the new podcast, Hemingway's Picasso. Stephen Coe lived many lives. He was an NFL journeyman, a male model, and one of the most well-connected smugglers in 1980s Miami. Coe collected many souvenirs from his adventures, but his most treasured bounty, a beautiful ceramic crafted by Pablo Picasso and gifted to Ernest Hemingway at the author's Cuban home. So the story goes. Lost during the Cuban Revolution, the artwork resurfaced when Coe took it as payment for a drug run financed by the notorious Pablo Escobar. Coe passed away in 2018, passing the piece down to his son, Stevie. Stevie feels he needs to complete his father's mission of selling this piece and telling Steve's cinematic life story. Is the Picasso authentic or a fraud? Was Steve Coe a big talker or a real deal smuggler? Listen to new episodes of Hemingway's Picasso every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
From Wondery, I'm Lindsey Graham, and this is American Scandal. By 1960, for the first time in years, rock and roll is no longer dominating the airwaves. The year's biggest hit is the theme music from the movie A Summer Place, a syrupy, easy-listening instrumental by a bland Canadian bandleader named Percy Faith. It's no coincidence that rock's sudden decline comes just as many of the nation's top radio DJs are being called before Congress. No DJ wants to get a subpoena and be forced to testify about payola, a practice so widespread that nearly everyone in the business has accepted some. And the easiest way to avoid getting subpoenaed is to stop playing rock records. Though payola affects every corner of the music business and has for decades, the hearing's focus is on how it's been used to promote rock and roll. It's an election year, and politicians know that many of their constituents are uneasy about this wild new style of music and the way it's captivated America's youth. This is episode 3, Rock and Roll on Trial. It's Saturday, February 13th, 1960. Backstage at ABC TV's Little Theater in New York City, Dick Clark sits in a makeup chair, getting prepped for his Saturday night Beach Nut show, a primetime spin-off of his hit afternoon show, American Bandstand. As he steps out of the makeup chair, Clark looks tired and pensive, and with good reason. The Payola hearings are only a week old, and already Clark's name is being dragged through the mud. On Wednesday, the president of ABC's record label, Ampar, presented a list of 8 Ampar songs whose copyrights Clark had acquired, all openly and legally, though the news reports tried their best to make it sound shady. Then there was a list of Christmas gifts Ampar had sent to Clark over the years, a $25 salad bowl, a $23 blender, as if it was a crime to give someone a Christmas gift. Clark knows that more than ever, he has to be on his best behavior, and these days, that means playing less rock and roll. The taint of Payola on the entire genre is just too strong. He's not alone in this. Nearly every DJ in the business is laying off the rock singles. Even many recording artists who got their start playing rock music have turned their backs on it. Clark's guest tonight, Paul Anka, is case in point.
Now, if I may, here's a man that turns out hits like, I don't know, he is a fantastic individual. Incidentally, he's embarking on a new career. He starts his nightclub tours very soon. He opens in Washington, then goes down to Las Vegas. It's a new thing for him. We wish him all the best. But in the meantime, he's got another hit record, a thing called Puppy Love. Here's Paul Anka.
And they called it Puppy Love.
A few blocks north of where Clark is doing his broadcast, Alan Freed sits in his living room, drinking a scotch, and watching Anka's performance on his big black and white TV. He can only stomach a few seconds of the sugary ballad before he gets up and switches it off in disgust. He never much liked Anka to begin with, but his new easy listening sound is intolerable. Freed has not yet been called to testify before Congress, but he knows it's coming. His lawyer has advised him to say as little as possible, that even though there are no federal laws against Payola, he could still be indicted in New York under its more strict commercial bribery laws. But Freed is tired of keeping his mouth shut. He's yearning to defend himself. All his life, Freed has spoken his mind. It's what made him a successful DJ. He was a rebel, a free spirit, championing rock and roll when few other DJs would. Now to be forced to shut up at this moment when he's at risk of losing everything, it's almost more than he can bear. 2 months later, on April 25th, 1960, Freed gets his turn. Over 30 DJs, label owners, music publishers, and record distributors have testified in the last 3 months, along with representatives of the Federal Trade and Communications Commission. But it's Freed that everyone's hungry to hear from. Though he hasn't been on the air since he was fired from both his radio and TV jobs, Freed is still one of the most famous DJs in the country. His arrival in Washington is big news, even though he'll be testifying behind closed doors. At the Longworth House office building, Freed and his lawyer, Warren Trube, push their way past a mob of reporters into a room that, by contrast, is eerily quiet. Freed and Trube sit down at a long wood panel table in the middle of the room. Surrounding them on 3 sides are 9 congressmen, wearing dark suits and stern expressions. General Counsel Robert Lishman starts by giving Freed a copy of a legal document, an affidavit signed by American Bandstand host Dick Clark, pledging to his employers at ABC that he never accepted Payola. Freed was given a similar affidavit and refused to sign it because he didn't want to perjure himself. Because of his refusal, ABC fired him. Now, for the first time, he sees how his nemesis escaped a similar fate. Clark's lawyers rewrote the affidavit with a much narrower definition of Payola. Clark's affidavit says it's only Payola if you take money first, then play the record later. Freed knows firsthand that it's more complicated than that, and he's sure Clark knows it too. General Counsel Lishman strides to the front of the room. Mr. Freed, in your opinion, is that the definition of Payola that is generally accepted? No, it's not. He's wrong. I know the record business very well. I've been in it for 20 years. I say if you're going to use the word Payola in this investigation, you've got to use it whether you receive money or gifts before you play the record or whether you get them after you play the record. There can't be 2 different types of Payola. If the definition of Payola that is contained in the Clark affidavit was contained in your affidavit, could you have signed that agreement and not committed perjury? Yes, sir. I would be as clean as the driven snow. This morning, Freed's lawyer reminded him to say as little as possible today, and so far he's complied. But all this talk of Dick Clark is bringing up Freed's old feelings of resentment. 2 different affidavits isn't fair. He begins ranting about how ABC gave Clark special treatment because American Bandstand is such a cash cow. Why should I be the scapegoat? Why me? Because I could be sacrificed, that's why, but not Dick Clark. It's a double standard. All his life he's spoken his mind, and now Freed's on a roll. He talks about how the Payola system works, how record companies make payments, and what DJs typically promise in return. He names labels and distributors, companies that essentially had him on their payroll. He even specifically mentions a $10,000 loan he received in 1958 from his friend and former manager, Roulette Records owner Morris Levy. But he's careful to describe all the payments as thank you gifts, loans, or consulting fees. I just want to be clear that I've never taken a bribe. If I help somebody and they want to pay me or give me a gift, sure. But I wouldn't take a dime to plug a record. The committee seems to be enjoying Freed's testimony. No one has spoken quite so freely. Freed knows that he has the politicians eating out of his hand. For the first time in months, Freed is feeling almost relaxed. As he waxes on providing additional details, Congressman John Bennett jumps in with a question. You were receiving this money from the record companies to plug their records on the air. Is that not true? Freed answers without thinking. Yes. Freed's lawyer immediately realizes his client's mistake. Freed is completely contradicting what he just said minutes earlier about never taking money to plug a record. He leaps to his feet, asking, wait a minute, what was the question? Trube tries to strike Freed's answer from the record, but it's too late. Alan Freed has just told Congress that he's taken money to play records on the radio. Even by Dick Clark's narrow definition of payola, he's admitted his guilt. Fried, too, realizes his mistake and tries to talk his way out of it. He talks and talks and talks some more. Feels good to talk. He's missed talking since he's been off the air. Finally, a weary Orrin Harris cuts him off with a bang of his gavel. Thank you, Mr. Fried. You've been a very cooperative witness. The committee will recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And, as if coming out of a trance, Fried glances at the clock on the wall and is shocked to see it's almost 7:30 p.m. He's been testifying for nearly 5 hours. Robert Lischman is over the moon. One of the most famous DJs of the 1950s just spilled his guts about everything Lischman suspected. And his testimony about Dick Clark's affidavit pledging that he never took payola has given Lischman additional ammunition to go after Clark, who is set to testify in just a few days. Alan Fried is a big piece of the payola puzzle, but Clark is even bigger. His small empire of various music-related businesses is riddled with conflicts of interest. On nearly every episode of his show, American Bandstand, Clark played songs he was profiting from, either through his ownership of the song's copyright or managing the artist who recorded it, or even manufacturing the song's singles at his record pressing plant. Lischman believes that Clark built his empire on a more sophisticated version of payola, not taking cash payments for playing records, but demanding a piece of the song's copyright, or promising more plays if he could release the song on one of his record labels. If Lischman can get Clark to admit how much he used American Bandstand as a vehicle to promote his own records, or even just make him look dishonest or evasive, it will be a major victory to him and a blow to the rock and roll industry Clark represents. It might even help Lischman and Committee Chairman Harris achieve one of their ultimate goals, getting American Bandstand and shows like it canceled. Over the next 3 days, Lischman calls several of Clark's associates, people who ran his record labels and publishing companies, or who often did business with him in his role as host of American Bandstand. One of his key witnesses is Harry Finfer, a veteran Philadelphia record promoter and co-owner of Clark's label Jamie Records. It was Finfer who brought guitarist Duane Eddy to Jamie Records, right before he became one of American Bandstand's most frequent guests. It was also Finfer who brokered the deal that gave Clark the publishing rights to the song 16 Candles, again, right before Clark put it in heavy rotation on Bandstand, which helped it become a smash hit. Finfer is Lischman's favorite kind of witness, stammering and unsure of himself, with a mustache that twitches when he gets flustered. Under heavy questioning from Lischman, he appears shifty and evasive. It's especially hard to believe him when he admits that he gave payola to numerous DJs to promote Jamie Records singles, but then denies that Dick Clark ever had any idea what he was doing. By the end of the testimony, Finfer's bright red face and twitching mustache practically seem to confirm his guilt. By extension, Dick Clark's too. Finally, Lischman is ready to call the man himself. On Friday, April 29th, Dick Clark arrives at the House Caucus Room in D.C. It's a grand space, much bigger than the room in which Alan Fried gave his testimony, with massive crystal chandeliers, high ceilings, and walls covered in classical Greek detailing. A gallery of more than 200 reporters and spectators fill the rows of bench seating that extend to the back of the room. Camera crews line the walls. Clark strolls into the room like he owns the place. He wears a navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, and gleaming black loafers. He looks like the world's most stylish banker. Even his hair is perfect. He flashes a smile to the camera crews and gives a discreet wave to the teenage girls scattered throughout the gallery. Then he takes a seat at the long witness table lined with microphones. Congressman Orrin Harris, sitting in the center of the long dais, bangs his gavel to quiet the crowd. Robert Lischman sits off to one side and looks through his papers. He knows Clark will be a much tougher witness than Alan Fried. Where Fried was twitchy and hot-tempered, Clark is cool and polished, and he's very, very smart. Before Lischman can even begin, Clark asks if he can read a prepared statement. Harris nods. Clark stands and reads aloud. Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, I feel I have been convicted, condemned, and denounced even before I had an opportunity to tell my story. Lischman's strategy seems to be backfiring. He had hoped by calling in Clark's associates to testify first, he could prove the Bandstand's host guilt before he had a chance to testify. Now, Clark is trying to paint himself as a victim, unfairly vilified, and the spectators look sympathetic. Then Clark begins to tell his side, how he's been wrongly accused when all along he's been trying to do the right thing. Over the next hour, Clark describes in detail all 33 of the various companies he once owned or part-owned. He tells committee members which ones he dissolved or sold off as soon as the payola scandal broke to avoid any appearance of wrongdoing. His strategy is to steamroll the committee with information, to give the appearance that he's being completely transparent, and it looks like it's working. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of Clark's testimony, Lischman is allowed to begin his questioning. He stands up and clears his throat in a self-important way, but it doesn't go well. When Lischman confronts, Clark sidesteps. The TV host seems to be a master at giving evasive answers while appearing to be completely honest. When Lischman asks him about the 1957 doo-wop song Butterfly and what Clark's interests were in the #1 hit, Clark admits that he got paid $7,000 for his share of the song's royalties. He says he had an oral agreement with the song's original copyright holder. Lischman asks, what was this oral agreement? What did you agree to get this 25% of the royalties on the song? Clark replies, I agreed to absolutely nothing. Why did you have to enter into an agreement to do nothing? Mr. Lischman, you're an attorney. You put a lot more significance into the word agreement than I did. Lischman then tries to switch tactics. He cites a detailed survey of American Bandstand's playlists. He argues that the survey proves statistically that the more of a financial stake Clark had in any given song, the more he played it on his show. As an example, he cites the music of Duane Eddy, the twangy young guitarist whose label and management companies were both owned by Clark, and whose popular song put a lot of money in Clark's pocket. Before Jamie Records signed Duane Eddy, Clark bought an ownership stake in the company for just $125. After Eddy joined the label, he earned a return of over $30,000 on that investment. Lischman leans in. During the period of August 5th, 1957 to November 30th, 1959, you played 11 of his titles a total of 240 times. Is that correct? Clark replies, "This is true, Mr. Lishman, but you were presuming that because I had a financial interest in Duane Eddy, I played more Duane Eddy. This does not go along with your survey, which shows many plays for people in whom I had no interest at all." Lishman leers. "Frank Sinatra has popular records, doesn't he?" Clark winks. "Occasionally, yes." There's some laughter in the courtroom. "Well, don't you think in the same period that he moved some popular records?" Clark smiles. "Mr. Lishman, Mr. Sinatra's audience is slightly different from mine." "Well, do you know that you didn't play him once during that period?" Clark's smile broadens. "Yes, I'm quite aware of that. I didn't play any Italian opera either." The laughter in the courtroom grows louder. Lishman can feel his face turning red. Now Clark is making him look foolish. Lishman glances nervously at Orrin Harris and sees that even the committee chairman is holding back laughter. Hour after hour, under a barrage of questions from every committee member, Dick Clark doesn't slip up once. Nothing knocks him off his talking points. At the end of the day, Clark sums up his position. "I believe in my heart and have sworn here, and I will tell you the truth, I have never taken payola. I think the crime I have committed, if any, is that I made a great deal of money in a short time on little investment." Lishman can't believe Clark is arguing that he is not only innocent of any wrongdoing, he is implying he's the embodiment of the American dream. Lishman shakes his head in wonder. This kid is good. At the end of Clark's second day of testimony, Chairman Harris finally dismisses him, but not before he calls Clark a fine young man. Lishman is floored. The man who was supposed to be the Payola investigation's biggest target has been sent home with a pat on the back. Clark may have sailed through the Payola hearings, but his reputation takes a hit. The press is not as quick as Orrin Harris to let him off the hook. The Washington Post even coins a new word, Clarkola, to describe the American Bandstand host's many conflicts of interest. But thanks to his brilliant performance in front of the committee, his career is still intact. Others won't be so lucky. In New York, investigators are preparing to file criminal charges against several DJs in the wake of the Payola scandal. Dick Clark isn't one of them, but Alan Freed is. In the small town of Fox Lake, Illinois, Joe Gliniewicz was a hometown hero and 30-year veteran of the local police department. On September 1st, 2015, just 1 month from retirement, he was found dead outside an abandoned cement plant, shot in the chest twice at close range. While the town and Joe's family mourned his passing, hundreds of police officers launched a manhunt to find his killer. After weeks of searching, the lead investigator discovered chilling secrets about Joe, the local police department, and the village of Fox Lake. These were secrets that, once uncovered, would put the town in the national spotlight and haunt them for years to come. Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a 3rd season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body Season 3, Fox Lake, on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app.
Russ Ulbricht is using the library's Wi-Fi to work on his online marketplace, Silk Road. The site specializes in selling contraband like illegal drugs and depends on cryptocurrency to keep users anonymous. Suddenly, he hears a commotion.
I hate you! Get away from me!
But as he turns his head, a woman grabs his laptop.
Freeze! FBI!
The officers slam Ulbricht's body against the table. Then, the sound of handcuffs being clicked shut signals the end of his life as a free man. Hi, I'm David Brown, the host of Wondery's show Business Wars. We go deep into some of the biggest corporate rivalries of all time. And in our latest series, we tell the story of the wild frontiers of the digital gold rush. Listen to Crypto Wars on Business Wars on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Wondery app. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen 1 week early and ad-free.
On May 19, 1960, Hal Jackson arrives at the New York Police Department's Elizabeth Street precinct in Chinatown. Jackson is the most famous black DJ in New York, and despite the heat, he's dressed as sharply as ever in a dark suit and polished brown wingtips. Jackson isn't entirely sure why he's here. He got a call yesterday from the district attorney's office telling him to report to the police station regarding the DA's commercial bribery investigation. Commercial bribery presumably means payola, but Jackson isn't sure what that has to do with him. He's taken a few gifts from record companies over the years, but never anything you'd call a bribe. In the station waiting room, Jackson is taken aback. Half a dozen of his fellow rock and roll and rhythm and blues DJs are milling around, along with a dozen reporters and photographers. Everyone's talking and laughing. "Hey, Hal, glad you can join the fun." "Jack, what the hell's going on here?" Jack is Jack Walker, another of New York's best-known black DJs, and one of Jackson's colleagues at WLIB, a rhythm and blues station based in Harlem. "Hell if I know, something about payola, I guess." Next to Walker is another popular black DJ, Tommy Dr. Jive Smalls. "They got you down here too, Jive? Wouldn't be a party without me." And behind the two DJs sits Alan Freed. Jackson is surprised to see him here. Last he heard, Freed had moved to Los Angeles. "Alan, what are you doing back in New York?" "Couldn't miss the perp walk, Hal. DA's orders." A photographer jumps out into the corridor. "Smile, boys." Finally, it dawns on Jackson. The district attorney rounded up all the city's best-known DJs in a single sweep, then tipped off the paper so they could come and document the whole thing. They're about to be arrested, and the DA is going to make it a photo op. Jackson looks over the paperwork and gets an arraignment date. He's startled to see that the DA is charging him with 39 separate counts of commercial bribery. He can't imagine where they came up with that number. Still, everyone else seems to be treating the whole thing like a joke, so he decides not to worry about it. It's not long before Jackson realizes that his arrest is no laughing matter. The day after his precinct visit, his station manager at WLIB confronts him outside the broadcast booth and tells him he's been suspended. It's just for a few days, the station manager assures him, just until all this blows over. But it doesn't blow over. As the weeks go by, Jackson still can't get his job back. He pleads not guilty to the bribery charges, but with his trial date still months away and the Payola story still in the news, Jackson has no way to defend himself. His lawyer insists that he not speak to the press, that the wisest course of action is to keep a low profile. But keeping a low profile isn't helping him get back to the only work he loves, being a DJ. And as weeks turn into months, he can't seem to get a single gig. No one in the radio industry will hire him. It's as if he's been blacklisted. Community leaders in Harlem organized protests outside WLIB's headquarters, demanding the owners give Jackson back his job. But it's no use. The station is under too much political pressure. With his savings dwindling, Jackson scrambles to find other work. He takes on a night shift job as a janitor, cleaning office buildings. By day, he drives a cab. Sometimes when he's taking a fare down Riverside Drive, he passes his own face on a WLIB billboard. Jackson suspects, but can't prove, that the DA's office is targeting him because of his civil rights activism. He's a friend and associate of both Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. His suspicions are further aroused when WLIB rehires Jack Walker, another black DJ arrested in the DA sweep, but they still refuse to rehire him. And Walker still has to stand trial for his 33 counts of commercial bribery. Are Jackson's 39 counts really that much worse? But there's nothing Jackson can do except wait his day in court. While Hal Jackson is picking up fares in his taxi, his fellow DJ Alan Freed is finally back on the air. Shortly before his arrest in New York, Freed began a new job at K-Day, a station in Los Angeles. Now, while he waits for his own trial date, the former king of rock and roll hosts an afternoon show 6 days a week. With his legal bills mounting and no more payola coming in, Freed also gets back to one of his other sources of income, booking and hosting live concerts. On June 25th, 1961, a year after his move to LA, he hosts one of the biggest shows of his career, the Alan Freed K-Day Spectacular at the Hollywood Bowl. It's a triumph, selling out all 17,000 of the bowl seats. The next day, Freed is walking on air. Sure, he's still facing 26 counts of commercial bribery in New York, each carrying up to a $1,000 fine or a year in prison. But no DJ has ever done jail time for payola. And now that over a year has passed since the congressional hearings, the media's obsession with the whole thing has died down. For the first time in years, Freed is feeling optimistic. At 4 p.m. on June 26, 1961, at K-Day Studios, Alan Freed signs off from his afternoon radio show. Well, that's all we have time for today. Keep it locked here on KDAM 1580 for all your favorite rhythm and blues hits, and I'll see you Hepcats tomorrow. So long. Before Freed can take off his headphones, though, he hears the station engineer cut in. Hey, Alan, Mel wants to see you in his office. Mel is Mel Leeds, K-Day's program director and the man who got Freed this job. Leeds and Freed are old pals. They've been through a lot together. Freed figures his old friend wants to congratulate him on last night's successful Hollywood Bowl show. Freed knocks on the door of Leeds' small office and enters. Leeds is a small, wiry Midwestern with a loud, overbearing personality. Back in New York, he was notorious for carrying a loaded gun to work. For protection on the subway, he said. But he's mellowed in recent years. The Payola scandal took a toll on him, too, and he plays things more by the book now. No more gun, no more letting DJs like Freed play whatever they want. K-Day has set playlists now, and DJs are expected to follow them. Freed sits down. You should have been there last night, Mel. It was like the old days. The joint was hopping. Yeah, sorry I missed it, Alan. But actually, that's what I wanted to see you about. Sure. I bet the station wants a piece of the next one, right? Freed put the K-Day name on the Hollywood Bowl show because he was contractually obligated to, but otherwise he did the show entirely on his own, working with an outside promoter. No one at K-Day seemed really interested in the show, but now they've seen what a success it was, Freed assumes they'll want in on the next one. Look, Alan, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the station just doesn't want you promoting any more outside shows. Freed takes a minute to process what he's hearing. I don't understand. I can't promote my own shows on the air anymore? You can't promote them. You can't book them. You can't do them, Alan. No more outside shows, no more dances, sock hops, events of any kind. The station owners just don't like the way it looks. After the Payola hearings, Congress passed a law that authorized the Federal Communications Commission to fine radio stations up to $1,000 a day for Payola violations. Someone at K-Day is probably afraid that Freed promised extra spins to the artists on the bill that night. This is bull, Mel, and you know it. I'm not doing anything wrong. If anything, K-Day should be thanking me. I plugged them to 17,000 kids last night. Yeah, sorry, Alan, my hands are tied. You can't tell me what to do on my own time, Mel. I'll quit first. But Leeds just shrugs. Freed is fully prepared to make good on his threat, but K-Day beats him to it. A few days later, K-Day fires him. For the second time in less than 2 years, he's out of a job. Depressed and burning through what little remains of his savings, Freed retreats to Palm Springs, where he and his third wife hole up in their modest ranch house and wait for the New York District Attorney's office to set Freed's trial date. As the days slowly roll by, Freed starts to drink heavily again, day and night, trying to keep his depression and the desert heat at bay. He's weak, in poor health. Even his once powerful voice is now raspy and cracked. With the trial looming, he feels like his life and career are in limbo, which is all the more frustrating because rock and roll is making a comeback. A new style called surf rock is all the rage here in California, and soul music is having a moment too, especially thanks to a new Detroit label called Motown. If he can just get through this last Payola trial, Freed thinks maybe he can make a comeback too. After months of delays, on February 8, 1962, Hal Jackson finally gets his day in court. The last 8 months have been hard on the man who was once New York's best-known black DJ. He finally managed to land a DJ job in Philadelphia, hosting a classical music show in the morning and a rhythm and blues show in the afternoon. He commutes from New York, a 2-hour train ride each way, 5 days a week. But the Payola scandal took a toll on his personal life. Under the strain, his marriage of 22 years fell apart. But today, Jackson plans to get his name back. At the courthouse, the DJ and his attorney prepare to enter his not guilty plea. But then, the prosecuting attorney makes a startling announcement. All charges against Jackson have been dropped. He's free to go. Jackson is relieved, but also furious. A year ago, when the district attorney staged his Payola photo op at the Chinatown precinct station, Jackson's name and face were plastered across every front page in town. Now that he's exonerated, though, not a single reporter is present. His reputation is ruined, his marriage destroyed, and for what? So a few politicians could score points in an election year. Hal Jackson isn't the only one feeling like the Payola scandal was much ado about nothing. At Roulette Records, Alan Freed's old friend Morris Levy is celebrating the fact that all Payola charges against his label were also dropped. It's quite a legal victory for one of the industry's most notorious distributors of Payola, and the man who admitted in front of a New York grand jury that a $10,000 loan he once gave to Freed was essentially a bribe. And the good news couldn't have come at a better time. In January of 1962, Roulette scores its first #1 record, Peppermint Twist, by Joey D and the Starlighters. Now that the heat is off Roulette, Levy wastes no time in going back to his old ways. In the spring of 1962, he sends his business partner, George Goldner, on a promotional tour to radio stations all over the country. Goldner is a 44-year-old industry veteran with what's known in the business as golden years. He has discovered and developed dozens of popular rock and doo-wop acts. But his ear for hit records is matched by his lack of business acumen. And to pay off his debts, he's gone into business with Levy. Joining Goldner on his trip is Roulette's new star, Joey D, a 21-year-old Italian-American doo-wop singer from New Jersey with a pompadour of jet black hair and matinee idol looks. Levy and Goldner want to build on the success of D's #1 record, Peppermint Twist, by convincing radio stations to play his next single, Hey, Let's Twist. Joey has no idea what town he's in. For the past several days, he's been living out of the back of a limousine, and he's exhausted. One morning, George Goldner shakes Joey's shoulder, rousing him from half sleep. "Come on, Joey," he says. "Time to sell some records." Joey brushes the crumbs of his last meal from his rumpled suit and climbs out of the limo. At every station they visit, the routine is the same. He goes in, gives a brief on-air interview, records a few station IDs, then goes back to the limo and waits while Goldner does whatever he does. Joey has a pretty good idea, though, that it involves paying someone to play Roulette's songs. He got a glimpse inside Goldner's briefcase and saw stacks of $20 bills. But he's already learned that it's better not to ask any questions. This time, one of the guys from the radio station comes out and joins them in the limo. Ever since the Payola scandal, most DJs don't get to pick their own records anymore. That job now belongs to a station boss called a program director. Joey figures that that's who this guy is. Somehow stations have convinced the government that this will get rid of Payola, but as far as Joey can tell, it just means you only have to pay off one guy now instead of 10. Goldner and Joey take the program director to a steakhouse, where he gorges himself on Goldner's dime. After dinner, there are two girls sitting in the back of the limo. Joey's told to wait outside. He bumps a cigarette from the limo driver and wonders what the hell he's gotten himself into. Growing up in Passaic, New Jersey, Joey dreamed of becoming a teen idol like his heroes Dion and the Belmonts. Now he's achieved that dream. He's had a #1 record, and yet here he is in a steakhouse parking lot in the middle of nowhere, waiting for a couple of prostitutes to service some radio clown so he'll play Joey's next single. Joey's seen things around the Roulette Records offices, things that tell him he's better off not asking too many questions about how Peppermint Twist became a #1 record, or why he still hasn't seen a dime in royalties from it. Once he walked into Morris Levy's office and one of Levy's goons was dangling some poor guy out the window 20 floors up. "Give us a minute, Joey," Morris said, totally calm, like he was just in the middle of a sales meeting. The newspapers may say that Payola is a thing of the past, but Joey D knows better. At Roulette Records, it's business as usual. And anyone who takes the money, or the steak, or the girls, and doesn't play Roulette's music, well, that person might just find themselves hanging out a window. As Roulette's success grows, Morris Levy doesn't forget his friends. When he hears that Alan Freed is going through a rough patch, he calls in a few favors and helps the troubled DJ get a job at WQAM in Miami. The station's headquarters are just a few miles inland from the Americana Hotel, where only 2 years ago, Freed looked around at all the money changing hands at the annual disc jockey convention and wondered if this whole Payola thing was getting out of hand. Freed's name recognition boosts WQAM's ratings, but his drinking is still out of control, and he shows up drunk for his evening time slot one too many times. After just 3 months, he's fired. Again. In November of 1962, Freed and his wife go back to Palm Springs, but they've barely had time to unpack before Freed is summoned to New York. A date for his commercial bribery trial has finally been set. On December 10th, 1962, Freed appears before a judge at the New York County Criminal Court building in downtown Manhattan. He is charged with 26 counts of commercial bribery, which add up to over $30,000 worth of payola over a 2-year period, the equivalent of $250,000 in today's dollars. Freed can't afford a long trial, and the evidence against him is overwhelming, so he pleads guilty. The judge is surprisingly lenient. He gives Freed a 6-month suspended sentence and orders him to pay a fine of $500. Freed's lawyer, citing his client's distressed financial situation, negotiates the fine down to $300. Before he goes back to California, Freed pays one last visit to Morris Levy at his Midtown Manhattan office. The two old friends reminisce about the good old days. Levy asks Freed if he needs any money. Fried does, but he's too proud to admit it. Besides, it's not like Fried can offer him anything in return. He doesn't have a radio show anymore. Somehow, accepting Levy's money no longer feels right. But Fried's not out of the woods yet. In 1964, he's indicted again, this time for tax evasion. According to the IRS, he owes them over $37,000 in back taxes, most of it from unreported Payola income. On January 20th, 1965, impoverished and broken, Alan Fried dies. He was 43 years old. The official cause of death is given as liver and kidney failure, exacerbated by his heavy drinking. But his family says that he died of a broken heart. The one thing he loved more than anything in the world, playing rock and roll records on the radio, was taken away from him, and he never recovered. Right up until Fried's final days, Morris Levy continued to send money to his old friend. Fried protested, but accepted it. He needed it to cover his medical bills. But after Fried's last trip to New York, the two never saw each other again. By the time of Alan Fried's death, most of the public has forgotten about Payola. All the major investigations are over. Robert Lischman goes into private law practice, and Orrin Harris leaves Congress to accept a judgeship from the new president, Lyndon B. Johnson. The new federal anti-Payola law puts enforcement in the hands of the FCC, and throughout the rest of the 60s, they appear to be doing a good job. Instances of Payola are rare and swiftly dealt with. A few stations are fined, a few more DJs lose their jobs, but mostly, Payola seems to be a thing of the past. That's certainly the case for Dick Clark and Hal Jackson. After the Payola hearings, American Bandstand becomes more successful than ever. In 1964, Clark moves the show to Los Angeles, where he launches his second career as a game show host. Bandstand remains on the air until 1989, earning Clark the nickname America's oldest living teenager. For Hal Jackson, his vindication in the wake of the Payola scandal is even sweeter. In 1971, he and a business partner purchased WLIB, the same station that fired him after he was charged with taking Payola in 1960. He changes the station's call letters to WBLS and its slogan to the total black experience in sound. It's New York City's first black-owned radio station, and by 1979, it's also the top-ranked station in town. For others, however, the effects of Payola linger for years, even decades. Many of the artists who owed their hit records to people like Alan Fried and Morris Levy find that they've made a devil's bargain. Joey D is shocked to learn that even though Peppermint Twist went to #1, his promotional tour of radio stations with George Goldner allegedly cost more than he earned on record sales. Instead of a royalty check, he gets a bill from Roulette for $8,000. And the doo-wop group Alan Fried managed, the Moonglows, never collect any royalties on their music until 1989, when industry-wide royalty reforms finally right some of the wrongs of the 50s and 60s. Even so, to this day, on numerous Moonglows songs, the co-writer is still listed as Alan Fried, even though, according to Moonglows founder Harvey Fuqua, Fried took the credit not because he actually wrote any of the group's music, but as a form of Payola. But Payola has not completely gone away. It's just gone underground. There may be a federal law against it, but there are record companies willing to break the law and hire shady characters to help them do it. And soon, a group of those shady characters are going to transform the record business and turn Payola into a criminal enterprise much greater in scope than anything Robert Lischman ever dreamed of. Payola will turn record promoters into millionaires and align them with the mafia. Next on American Scandal. In the 1980s, a shadowy group called the Network uses Payola to control the entire radio industry in unprecedented ways. And the law finally catches up to Morris Levy, but not in a way he or anyone else could have predicted. From Wondery, this is American Scandal. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Wondery.com, or wherever you're listening right now. If you're listening on a smartphone, tap or swipe over the cover art of this podcast. You'll find the episode notes, including some details you may have missed. You'll also find some offers from our sponsors. By supporting them, you help us offer this show to you for free. If you'd like to hear more of American Scandal and other Wondery shows, in addition to getting extra content, early access, and exclusive perks, you can subscribe to Wondery Plus. Go to Wondery.com/plus. That's Wondery.com/PLUS. You can also find us and me on Twitter. Search for hashtag American Scandal or follow me at Lindsey A. Graham. We use many sources when researching our stories, but we highly recommend the book Big Beat Heat, Alan Fried and the Early Years of Rock and Roll by John A. Jackson. And just a quick note about our reenactments. In most cases, we can't know exactly what was said, but everything in our show is based on historical research. American Scandal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsey Graham, for Airship. Sound design by Derek Behrens. This episode is written by Andy Herman, editing by Casey Miner. Executive producers are Stephanie Jens, Jenny Lauer-Beckman, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.